Rosa sat by the window, watching the road that led to her small house. She had always known the rhythm of her children's visits. Sundays after church, birthdays with laughter, the holidays that once filled her kitchen with life. But lately, the rhythm had changed. The footsteps stopped coming. At first, she told herself they were busy. The world was fast, after all, and she had raised them to be strong, independent. "They'll come soon," she would say aloud, mostly to silence the ache. But soon weeks became months, and the quiet began to feel permanent. Her house, once full of voices, now echoed only her own movements, the clinking of a cup, the turning of a page, the soft hum she made to keep herself company. One afternoon she made tea and placed 2 cups on the table out of habit. When she realized her mistake, she smiled faintly and whispered, "Old habits die slowly." But the smile didn't last. As dusk fell and the house dimmed, she whispered, "Lord, if no one else comes, please just stay a while." And though the world gave no sign, heaven was already listening. Every morning Rosa walked to the little mailbox at the end of her path. The sound of gravel beneath her slippers was part of her ritual. She'd open the box, peek inside, and always find the same thing: emptiness. She used to receive letters once. Notes from her children telling her about work, the grandchildren, their lives in distant cities. But over time, those letters grew shorter, then fewer, then none at all. At first, she kept checking, still believing there would be one tomorrow. But now, even that hope had faded. She told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't need words to feel loved. Still, every time she opened that empty box, something inside her sank just a little more. One morning she stood there longer than usual, the wind brushing her grey hair. "No news again," she said quietly. "Maybe that's good news." She tried to smile, but her voice trembled. When she turned back toward her house, she felt the familiar sting behind her eyes. "It's all right," she whispered. "They have their lives. I have you." But even those words sounded small against the vast, waiting silence. In the living room, on a shelf near the clock, stood the family photo, a frozen moment from a happier time. Her children's faces, her husband's steady smile, her own eyes bright and full of promise. Rosa dusted the frame every morning, as carefully as if it were sacred. Sometimes she spoke to it. "You were all so young," she'd say softly, her thumb tracing the edge of her husband's face. "And I was brave then. I thought I could handle anything." But bravery is easier when the house is full. Now, as the clock ticked in the background, the photo felt more like a memory of someone else's life. The people in it looked familiar but far away, as if time had carried them across a river she could no longer cross. Still, she couldn't put it away. It reminded her that she had once been loved deeply, once been needed. And though the smiles in the photo never changed, Rosa's prayer did. Lord, if they've forgotten me, remind them that I once loved them enough to let them go. The room stayed quiet, but not completely. Somewhere in the stillness, love still lingered, invisible, patient, waiting to bloom again. Every evening, Rosa prepared dinner the same way she always had. She still cooked as though someone might come through the door, a habit too deeply carved to break. Two plates, two glasses, two sets of cutlery. It was only when she sat down that she remembered there was no one to share it with. For a while she forced herself to eat at the small corner of the table, leaving the other side untouched. But eventually she began to set the extra plate anyway, not out of denial but out of tenderness. It was her way of honoring what once was. The laughter, the stories, the life that used to fill her kitchen. Sometimes she would look at that empty chair and whisper, "You'd still like my soup, wouldn't you?" Then she would smile faintly through the ache. But as the days turned into years, the chair became more than a memory. It became a reminder of the longing she had stopped trying to hide, the longing for someone to simply stay. When she finished her meal, she would fold her hands, close her eyes, and say quietly, "I still saved you a place, Lord." Just in case you ever want to sit with me. And somewhere beyond the veil of her loneliness, he had already taken that seat. There were things Rosa never spoke aloud, not even in prayer, words that carried too much weight, emotions too raw to give sound. She never said how deeply it hurt to be forgotten by the one she had once carried in her arms. She never spoke of the way the silence at night seemed to breathe beside her, like an unwanted companion. She never said how sometimes she wished God would simply take her in her sleep, not out of despair, but out of weariness. Instead, she said small things, prayers about the weather, gratitude for a meal, blessings for strangers she passed by in memory. The bigger things stayed locked inside, too sacred and too painful to name. But the miracle of grace is that God hears what the lips cannot say. And though Rosa believed her prayers were small, heaven heard every unspoken word, every ache disguised as silence, every tear that fell unseen. For even when she said nothing, her heart spoke loudly enough for God to listen. One night, when the loneliness felt heavier than usual, Rosa sat by her bed and tried to pray. The words came slowly, fragile as her breath. "Lord," she began, "I know you're good. I know you care. But I'm tired of being the one left behind." Her voice wavered. "If you still see me, if you still remember, please just let me know somehow." There was no answer, not at first. Only the hum of the old clock on her dresser and the whisper of wind outside the window. She sat there for a long while, waiting, her hands trembling slightly. When she finally lay down, she whispered one last line. "I don't need a miracle. I just don't want to feel invisible anymore." Then, as she drifted toward sleep, a quiet warmth settled over her, soft, steady, like a blanket being pulled up by unseen hands. She didn't open her eyes. She didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, Rosa felt something close, something kind, and a faint smile touched her lips. Heaven was answering, not with words, but with presence. Winter came early that year. The wind crept through the cracks in the old wooden walls, and the air in Rosa's house grew cold long before sunset. She pulled her shawl tighter, lit a candle, and sat near the window as the world outside faded into grey. The evenings were always hardest, the hour when memory woke and silence deepened. The cold made everything sharper, the ache in her joints, the emptiness in the next room, the loneliness that had settled in her bones. She rubbed her hands together and whispered, "Lord, it's getting cold in here." She didn't mean the room. She meant her heart. The candle flickered, throwing shadows against the wall. They looked like figures moving, almost alive, like memories come to visit. For a moment she imagined her children standing in the doorway again, their laughter echoing through the hall. But the sound never came. Still, as she watched the flame steady itself, she felt something stir, faint, like the first breath of dawn after a long night. It wasn't warmth exactly, but it was a beginning. And in the middle of her chill, a whisper brushed her spirit. "You are not alone tonight." That night, as Rosa lay awake beneath her thin blanket, she heard it. Not a voice in her ears, but a presence in her soul. It began with quiet. Not the heavy quiet of loneliness, but a peace that seemed to settle over everything, the walls, her heart, even her thoughts. She held her breath, afraid to move, afraid it might disappear. But it didn't. It stayed, her eyes filled with tears. "Is that you, Lord?" she whispered. There was no answer she could hear, but something deeper than hearing responded. The air itself seemed alive, soft, warm, filled with love that required no words. She closed her eyes, her hands pressed to her chest, and for the first time in years, she felt safe. The fear, the bitterness, the ache of being forgotten, all of it began to melt under the weight of that gentleness. And though she didn't understand it fully, she knew this much. He hadn't come to visit. He had come to stay. Morning came quietly. Rosa woke before sunrise, the light still pale outside. Her house was the same, her life unchanged, yet everything felt different. She rose slowly, her joints stiff but her heart light. The air in her home seemed softer, somehow alive with peace. It followed her into every room, the kitchen, the hall, even the small porch where she sat to sip her tea. She smiled without knowing why. "You're still here," she said softly, almost laughing at herself. "You didn't leave." There was no visible sign, no sound. But she didn't need one. She could feel him, steady, near, patient. The loneliness that had once wrapped itself around her like a shroud had lifted, replaced by quiet companionship. She began to talk to him throughout the day, as if he were sitting right beside her. "Do you like the smell of tea?" she'd ask. "The roses are trying to bloom again." No answer came, not in sound, but the warmth that filled her heart after every word was reply enough. He had come into her emptiness, not to visit, but to stay. That evening, Rosa lit her candle earlier than usual. The sky outside was painted with fading gold, and the air carried the smell of rain. She moved slowly through her small kitchen, humming softly, a tune she hadn't remembered in years. There was something different about the silence. It no longer pressed down on her chest or filled her with fear. Instead, it felt full, like a soft blanket around her soul. She poured tea into her cup and carried it to the table. For a long moment she stared at the chair across from her. Then she smiled and whispered, "This one's for you." And as she sat there, she felt it, that quiet warmth again, gentle and alive. It didn't come and go like a fleeting thought. It stayed. She didn't speak much after that. She didn't need to. Her heart did the talking, and she knew he could hear it. When she went to bed, she closed her eyes with a calm she hadn't felt in years. The wind outside sighed softly, the candle flickered out, and Rosa slept deeply, peacefully, without dreams. The presence stayed beside her through every breath of the night. The next morning dawned clear, the light pouring through her window in golden streams. Rosa woke slowly, her first thought not of pain, but of gratitude. The house felt alive. The same walls that once echoed with emptiness now seemed to breathe with quiet joy. She rose and went to the window, pressing her hand against the cool glass. The garden outside sparkled with dew. "You came back with the light," she whispered. "Didn't you?" She made breakfast, bread, tea, and a small bowl of fruit. It was a simple meal, but as she sat at her table she couldn't help smiling. She bowed her head and said grace, not out of habit, but from fullness. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying when everyone else left." Something in the air seemed to answer. It wasn't a sound, but a warmth, the kind that reaches deeper than skin, right to the soul. And as the morning light touched her face, Rosa's heart swelled with a peace that needed no explanation. She no longer looked out the window waiting for someone to arrive. The one she longed for was already home. That evening, as the sun slipped below the trees, Rosa set the table again. 2 plates, 2 cups, 2 slices of bread. It had been her ritual of hope for years, a small act of faith in the face of loneliness, but this time it didn't hurt. It felt right. She placed her hand on the chair across from hers and smiled. "You're here, aren't you?" she said softly. "I can't see you, but I feel you." Then, for the first time in her long, quiet years, she bowed her head and prayed, not in emptiness, but in presence. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for not leaving when everyone else did." The room seemed to glow in the candlelight, not bright, but warm, and though no one else would have seen it, the air shimmered faintly, as if unseen company filled the space. She took a sip of tea and sighed contentedly. "I used to think being alone was the worst thing," she whispered, "but now I see I was never truly alone." Somewhere deep within, she heard it, not with her ears but her heart. "I have always been with you." Days passed, and Rosa began to talk to him more, not in formal prayers, not in ritual, but in conversation. She spoke to him while washing dishes, while folding her blanket, while tending to the small flowers in her window box. Her words were simple, ordinary, sometimes even humorous. "You know, Lord," she said once, smiling to herself, "if you're going to stay here, you might as well help me find my spectacles." She chuckled softly, and a gentle warmth filled the room, as if he had laughed too. It wasn't madness or imagination. It was friendship, sacred, constant, real. In the evenings, when she sat by her lamp, she no longer felt the heaviness of silence. She could sense him near, not speaking, not needing to. Presence had replaced loneliness. Peace had taken the place of longing. "Thank you," she whispered one night, "for speaking without words." And though no one outside her walls would ever know it, the house was now full, full of love, full of quiet joy, full of the one who stays when everyone else goes. It was a bright afternoon when Rosa heard a knock at the door. Startled, she wiped her hands on her apron and went to open it. On the step stood a young woman from down the road, shy, uncertain, holding a small basket of bread. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," the woman said. "I've been meaning to stop by." "You always seem so peaceful when I see you at your window." Rosa smiled, motioning her in. "Come in, dear. Peace likes company." They sat together at the table, the same table where Rosa had once eaten alone. The young woman spoke hesitantly at first, then with tears, about her worries, her loneliness, the feeling of being unseen. Rosa listened, her heart aching with recognition. When the woman finished, Rosa reached across the table and took her hand. "You are not alone," she said softly. "I know what it feels like, but I also know someone who never leaves." The woman wept quietly, but when she left, she smiled, lighter, freer, as though something invisible had followed her home. That night, Rosa whispered, "You sent her, didn't you, Lord? You knew I'd share what you gave me." And somewhere in the quiet, she felt him smile. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood, not of miracles, but of kindness. People began to visit Rosa's little house, a widow from the next street, a young boy who had lost his grandmother, a mother seeking comfort. They came for tea, for prayer, for silence, and they all said the same thing. Your house feels different. It's peaceful. Rosa would just smile and say, that's because he stays here. Her small home, once cold and forgotten, had become a refuge. There was no music, no sermon, no great sign, only warmth. The kind that comes from a presence that lingers long after words are gone. She often thought about how much she had once feared being alone, and how she now cherished these quiet days. You turned my loneliness into your home, she prayed one evening. And somehow you made it home for others too. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of roses from her small garden. A whisper of beauty rising from the same soil that had once felt barren. Rosa's home had become a house of staying, a place where love lived and did not leave. One afternoon, while Rosa sat by her window, a wave of memory came. Her children, their laughter, their promises to visit. But this time, the memories didn't sting. They floated through her heart like faded petals carried by wind. She closed her eyes and whispered, "They didn't mean to hurt me. Life just moved faster for them." There was no bitterness left, no resentment. Only understanding, a grace that had taken years to bloom. The same Jesus who had stayed when they hadn't was now teaching her what love truly meant, to forgive without being asked. She prayed softly, "Lord, if they ever think of me, let it be with peace, not guilt. Tell them I love them still." And as the prayer left her lips, she felt something release inside her, a burden she didn't realize she was still carrying. The ache that had once been heavy with abandonment became light, almost beautiful. Forgiveness, she learned, was not a gift to the past, but a door to freedom. The silence around her deepened, but now it was holy. Weeks later, Rosa opened her mailbox and froze. Inside was a letter, real paper, real handwriting. Her hands trembled as she lifted it out. The return address made her heart catch. It was from her eldest daughter. She carried it inside and sat at the table staring at it for a long time before she dared to open it. The words were simple, hesitant, written with care. "Mom, I'm sorry it's been so long. I think of you every day. I've missed you more than I can say." Tears welled in her eyes as she read, but not the bitter kind. These were tears of peace. She smiled and pressed the letter to her heart. "Oh, my dear," she whispered, "you don't know. I already forgave you long ago." She didn't rush to write back. She prayed first, a soft, grateful prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for letting me see love return." But deep inside, she knew something more. The letter was a gift, yes, but it wasn't the healing. The healing had already come, long before the mail arrived. It had come the day Jesus decided to stay. That night, Rosa sat by her window with the letter beside her, the candlelight flickering softly. Outside, the sky was painted in deep blues and golds, the kind of evening that makes the soul quiet. She began to hum, low at first, then clearer. It was an old hymn she had sung as a girl, one her mother used to sing while cooking. The melody filled the room, gentle and pure. The presence she had come to know so well seemed to move closer, as if listening. Her heart swelled with gratitude, not just for the letter, but for the long journey that had brought her here. She paused mid-song and said softly, "You stayed, Lord. Through all the winters, through all the silence, you stayed." The candle flickered, and the air grew warm. She smiled. "I think you like my singing." And though no one else heard it, a peace deeper than music filled the house, a harmony of heaven and earth joined in the simple song of a woman who was no longer alone. The years had turned Rosa's hair to silver and her steps to whispers, but her eyes still carried light, that quiet, steady light that only comes from one who has walked with peace. It was a soft, cool evening. She had finished her tea, folded her shawl over her lap, and opened her Bible to her favorite verse. "I will never leave you, nor forsake you." Her lips moved as she read it again, slower this time, as though tasting every word. "I know," she whispered. "You never did." She looked around the little room, the chair across from her, the candle flickering, the silence filled with presence. Everything was familiar, but now it all felt like a farewell, not of sorrow, but of fulfillment. Her breathing grew shallow, her body tired, but her spirit rested like a child in safe arms. She closed her eyes and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being the one who stayed." The candle flame steadied, then bowed slightly, as though in reverence. And when the night deepened, she simply slipped away, no struggle, no fear, just a sigh that carried her into eternity, wrapped in the warmth of the one she had waited for her whole life. Morning light crept through the curtains, gentle and golden. Rosa's house was quiet, but not empty. She sat in her chair as though still praying, her hands resting peacefully over her Bible. The candle beside her had burned low but not out, a small flame still glowing. Neighbors came when she didn't answer the door. They found her smiling, serene, her home filled with a calm they couldn't explain. "She looks so peaceful," someone whispered, "like she's with someone she loves." And they were right. The table was still set for two cups of tea, two plates, as if she had been sharing her last meal with an unseen guest. Her family came days later, tearful, regretful, holding her hands, reading her notes, her letters, her Bible. But they didn't leave with despair. They left with something else, a sense that her house was still alive with kindness, because love had not left with her. It lingered, in the air, in the walls, in the warmth that stayed. The same presence that sat at her table now filled her eternity, and in the quiet that followed, heaven whispered through the house. She was never abandoned. She was always mine.